Mark.
V. Postpod!
Let's go. Yeah. Let's talk about radio, man.
Let's talk about radio. Let's talk about Pierre, first of all.
That was incredible.
He's a great guy. Like, so fun to talk to. I really enjoyed the conversation. I love, from where I left that world, broadcast media, to where it is today. It is just all the things that he's talking about. And the evidence and the research that he's pulling up, and all the work they're doing on measurement and stuff. It's really dramatically changed from when I had left that industry.
You know, early on in my career, I actually was a media planner back in Greece when I worked for Universal McCann. And it was interesting at the time because it was actually how I got into digital. Was through
you lived in Greece.
Yeah, for 10 years, man. It's incredible. But so the interesting thing at the time, I was actually above the line, if you remember those terms that we had, above the line, below the line.
Yeah.
But I was actually a media buyer for TV, radio, and print. So I would sell space in those three mediums. And what was interesting at the time was the amount of control we actually had over the media budgets in those three channels specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was 2008, 2009. That's when you start seeing kind of like the early stages of the shift happening to some of the digital. The problem was digital at the time, you were only really buying contextually. So you were trying to marry an ad to sites, that were somewhat relative in terms of, so
placement. Yeah,
exactly. So where I'm going with this now is to see that the strides that traditional channels, and like specifically radio now, are making. Like one thing that stood out to me, like the heat map.
Mm-hmm.
He was right. Like when we were talking about postal codes, it's where people lived, but we weren't looking at where people were going, or we had no way of understanding where people were going.
Right.
So we were targeting postal codes when in actuality, if I know that there's X amount of people in this area that is either closer to what my product is or my bricks and mortar location, that takes targeting to a whole other level and gives you a different appreciation for that medium.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
And I think that's what's becoming really unique here. And it goes back to the role of a marketer is to continue to stay curious.
Yeah.
Look at this stuff and understand. And of course, the US is a little bit further ahead. I'm sure we don't have this here in Canada yet, but man, there's so much here.
Yeah. Well, and the DTS thing that he was talking about with visual pairing of a logo to an ad, like an album cover.
Yeah.
That's also really interesting. It's not that it's complex. It's complex in terms of, if you think about the totality of a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the impact of creative. And you and I have talked about this before, but you now no longer just need a 30 TV spot and a 30-second audio spot, and then you could use the TV spot on the channel, let's say YouTube.
Yeah.
But now you need like all these additional assets. It's like building a YouTube ad. It's not just the video anymore. You got the companion banner, you got the copy, you've got like click-through experience. It's like
exactly
all that times however many channels you're using, because they're all increasing in the number of assets that they can utilize to get your message across. And it's all important.
Mm-hmm.
But you also need to customize the content for the channel. And so it's interesting.
Totally.
It's just interesting to hear that the evolution of the platform, and also that it's not just about radio anymore. It's also just about audio and the interaction of audio with all the other components.
Yeah, and I think I like that distinction. The audio platforms, like it can be a podcast, it can be actual radio, and I think when you think about it that way, and you just think about audio, then my question, then going back to say a marketing team, is like, what is your audio strategy?
Yeah.
Very simple, right? It could be sponsoring a podcast. It could be, sponsoring a specific segment on a radio show, or it could be radio ads or
Hmm.
whatever it is. But I think that it's been a miss in terms of a lot of the where a lot of the brands are focusing. And I love the examples of Adidas, Airbnb, really challenging the old notion of performance. Again, I'm not saying that it's not important. It is important. However, there's still this other side that you got to be nurturing those new users, if you
Yeah.
want, or the customers. And how do you achieve reach? Well, radio is a very cost-effective way in doing so. Or let's
Yeah.
use the term audio, maybe not radio, but
Yeah.
audio is a very cost-effective way of doing that.
Yeah. And the all impressions are not created equal, I think,
Agreed.
is a good point. Then his comment about the average TV spot is about, I think I might be messing up the numbers, but it's something like 20% nobody pays it, nobody even sees.
Yeah. Yeah.
20
I wrote it
40
down here
40% was just they get the audio version,
to
and
get the
then
audio.
the other 40% was they get the whole thing. So it's
Yeah.
so I think that's an important component of understanding how to construct creative, um, because you need to have, to his point, the sight sound motion component. I think, and you had a great point too, that you could build a whole campaign plan around a media plan around just picking your sight, picking your sound, picking your motion strategy, and then
Yeah.
finding the appropriate channels to deliver on that.
Exactly. And I think I don't know if it's just become a framework right now, but literally you can list all the channels that affect each of those, or have do you remember when we were again working at Sport Check, we got into a meeting room and we were planning um I think it was against a consumer decision journey and what channels were most effective
Hmm. Hmm.
against doing that. I almost see that as this similar exercise where these are the three key senses, if you
Yeah.
will. How are you building against a campaign against these three things?
Yeah.
And that can be, there's a creative lens that you apply, there's a media lens that you apply, and there's a messaging lens that you apply. So you can
Yeah.
have an overarching theme, but maybe the message on audio is different than the message that's being received through a video, right? Because you still want to build for the platform,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
underlying context should be the same.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where, there's a it may be a misperception around. Well, it's not a misperception. When you say something like brand, and we've had a lot of conversations about brand, it's such a big topic. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where, when you think about the brand overall, the consistency between the channels, there needs to be some kind of binding thread,
Yeah,
right? And so, as a distinctive asset, if you had a jingle, it 100% should be used on any video and any
exactly.
audio. And
Yeah,
then the visual that you have on the video should match the visual that you have on, like, let's say a billboard or a print
yeah,
ad or display ad. And
yeah,
so then that's part of how you build the cohesiveness of a brand,
yeah,
because you have these people that are consuming information through their senses, and you need to create a sensory brand
yeah.
from a point of view of like an individual consuming information.
I like what you just said there, sensory brand. I'm
Oh.
writing that down. Let's take a moment to talk about. There's one quote that I think really stuck with me is like, so media planners are taught this one thing right off the bat. It's taking the me out of media.
Yeah, that was a great line.
And when I thought about that, I would say I'm even guilty in terms of taking my own personal experiences and perpetuating that onto, hey, this is a best practice,
Yep.
because that's just how I would consume media, or the way I perceive that this was a great opportunity.
Yep.
But I only represented a small fraction of the population,
Yep.
and I think that's an interesting way to think about this is, and it's not just for media. I think it's for anything that we do.
Yep. I can think of a couple of specific examples, and I'll bring them up in a second. But I'll always say to people, like, whenever I talk to my team or whatever, I'm like, Okay, I'm a sample size of one. So
One.
take my perception and my thing that I'm saying with a grain of salt, because it's just my opinion. It might
Yeah.
be informed by other things, but it's really a lot of it to do with my own personal experience. So during the chat with Pierre, you had said, I listen to radio in the morning and then podcast during the day, and then maybe nothing
Yeah.
at night, maybe TV at night. So that's your experience, and that's
Mine.
real for you.
Yeah.
But for me, it might be I listen only in the afternoon to
Yeah.
radio, but I always listen to podcasts in the morning, or actually don't listen to anything. I just listen to like YouTube. I listen to YouTube music videos during the
Exactly.
day. And so that's real to me. And
Yeah.
so that's a thing that we have to get. It's not that, and to your point before with what Nicole said, reach two people. Like
Yeah.
that's why you need multiple spots throughout the day. And that AMA thing we
Exactly.
were talking about before, if you
That was
reach
really cool.
2,500 people in a 30-second window or 1 minute audience, it's
Hmm.
not necessarily the same 2,500 people the next hour or the
No,
hour after that or the hour out. And that's where you get that build on the reach.
totally. I
The
want to
other
go
one,
play in. Go ahead.
the other one I was thinking about was, I don't know if you were there or not, but when we were working at Sport Check, there was a moment in time where everyone was like, they did this thing where like, okay, tell me how you find information. Everybody's like, Google search was the number one thing.
Well, like
And
just internally, like we're doing like an
yeah,
internal focus
yeah,
group.
yeah.
Okay.
So then like, because all the leaders at the time were saying Google search is the number one way that we find information. So they're like, well, we got to double down or triple down or
I
drop
do
everything
remember
else,
that.
just put it all on Google
Yeah.
search. And so, but the question that wasn't asked is, how do you know what to put into Google search?
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're just saying, like, to your point, it's important for advertisers to be there when the keywords that they're looking for show up, but also important for somebody to just put your name in the search bar because they know that you have what they're looking for. Like
That's exactly
you
it.
could just skip all that other randomness, um, and not have to worry about, like, do I have enough budget for all the keyword, like over the course of the day that I'm running or over the month, or so that's why I think it's important to have both things going.
Oh, I agree. I don't know if I've used this analogy with you before, but I always like to think about like the idea of an apple tree. You know, an apple tree will produce naturally apples, right? The moment
Mm-hmm.
they fall down to the ground, that's essentially like performance marketing. It's picking up the ripe apple that's already fallen. That's
Mm-hmm.
what it does. But if you want to create or have this tree really, produce more apples, you're fertilizing the ground, you're watering the ground, you're doing all these other activities to have it produce more.
Mm-hmm.
That is your brand building activities or, your awareness activities.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have one without the other. So when I think about now, radio in the context and the power it actually has,
Mm-hmm.
is there a better medium to achieve that reach?
Mm-hmm.
um, at a very cost efficient way? I don't think there is,
Mm-hmm.
but it is going to force a lot of organizations and marketers to think creatively on how. And I think they called it. No, sorry, on the call they called it. Sonic brands. What is your sonic identity
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to try to create these distinctive assets now? We've been so trained like on the visual side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Audio is a wholly totally different game, and I think marketers should start investing more time there.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. There's so many things that I find fascinating about, just the conversation in general with Pierre, but like in a lot of ways, it's you brought up a good point. It's about the curiosity
Yeah,
around understanding media and the way, and really understanding customers, and
customer
or who
behavior.
your target audience is, and yeah, the customers there, and how they consume information, because it's never just a single channel. Like they never used a single channel the way we interpret them using a single channel. It's a combination of things like that. And so if we're trying to create influence, we have to think about the totality of that
Yeah.
impact as opposed to just a single channel event.
When I think about like one advertiser that comes to mind in radio, there's only one right now that for some reason I can always like think about, and it's like Spence Diamonds.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't know what their media mix is, but I have to think that most of their money is going into radio because
Yeah.
they're everywhere. So if I were to ever think about jewelry, well, maybe Spence is the ones that first comes to mind. Now, whether I follow up on that or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because they've created that now in my head. It's like they are a destination for jewelry. So
Yeah.
maybe I would consider them, right?
Well, you at least know about them.
I know about them. Yeah.
But and the funny thing is, because when I was working in broadcast media, they were one of the big advertisers, and so
Yeah.
that's like, and they were big advertisers for many years before that,
Yeah.
and they've also from when I so that was like at least they've been
It's 20
advertising at
years.
least 15 years.
Yeah.
They also had this. I don't know. You probably know. There's like scream. Woo! I can't
Oh.
scream. That's the worst scream ever. But at the end of the ad, it's like
or
it's
something like that.
it's like a distinctive asset. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it was the former owner who like did like a yeehaw. No, it
yeah,
wasn't yeehaw, but scream,
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah.
scream of joy.
The Spence scream.
And they
Yeah.
and I always paid attention to that, and because I'm the super mega nerd I am of like understanding distinctive assets. There's a period of time where they got away from it. A period of time when the new
They brought
management
it
came
back.
in, they got rid of it. They tried to do some other version of it,
Yeah.
and then they brought it back. But they've never
They did a
really,
poll on radio for that. Do you remember
yeah,
that?
yeah,
Go to the website and let us know which one you prefer.
yeah. So there's ways you can interact with the audience too,
Yeah.
but like I think that's one of those things where it is consistency matters over a period of
100%.
time, and you're not necessarily targeting the people who are buying today because they're buying today. Like you're trying to influence the people who are going to buy an engagement ring
Well, it
next
goes
year.
back to what Pierre said.
Yeah,
Being known before you're needed.
yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
how.
yeah,
I don't know, man. So much here. Uh it's
yeah.
almost like I want a do-over in a lot of the things that I have done in the past.
Well, why do you say that?
Well, I think I was too myopic in some elements. And yes, it was what I was hired to do. Of course, I had to make sure I was, doing my discipline right. So, I spent most of my career on the performance side. So obviously, you have to show value.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the time, or during specific times in my career, I think I just became too blinded by the information, the data that we had access to as performance marketers,
Mm-hmm.
not appreciating a lot of the other value in other channels. I think now I could look back and say I probably could have approached some of that a lot differently. That's all.
That's fair. In your own defense, though, I think that was what you were hired to do, and you were really good
Totally.
at it, right? So it's
Yeah.
not. But I think we're in a position now is that you have more broader scope of the full landscape of the media
That's fair.
channels. So I
That's
think
fair.
you're probably in a position now that, like, you having understood what you learned and what we're
Yeah.
hired to do, there's also other opportunities that now you can incorporate as a full complement to the way you would operate a
Yeah, that's
marketing
fair.
department.
Well, thanks, Mark.
I'm just trying to pump your tires, buddy.
Thanks, man. That works.
It's not a do-over, I don't think. It's just learning.
That's fair. It's just learning. It's just
Yeah.
learning.
And the same for me too. Like, I think in a lot of ways, it's almost like that Marshall McLuhan quote. Like at first, we shape the
Yeah,
tools, and then after they shape us, kind of thing. Like
totally.
the media, I think oftentimes, if you're assigned to be the search guy or the display guy or the
That's
email
what you're doing.
person or the TV person, the print fly person, like that shapes how you think. I think a lot of
Yeah,
times, instead of being able to step back and look at everything.
I agree. I agree. And I think, well, I don't know why I keep doing this, but I always try to think about it organizationally, like with structures and things like
Hmm.
that. And I know there's a big shift to the in-housing of a lot of the marketing technologies, like the platforms, and a lot of organization moving into that space. Is that the right way to do it? Like, are you creating the right questions in your team the moment that
Mm-hmm.
you have one person doing search and that's all they do? You
Yeah.
have one person doing display and that's all they do. What do you I think it could be very self-serving in that moment, but are you actually creating good marketers? I don't know. Or even digital marketers for that sense. Anyways,
Mm-hmm.
that's neither here or there right now, but it's just the way my mind works sometimes.
That's another story.
That's another
That
story.
could be another
Join
podcast.
us next week.
Anyway, I think that was a really great conversation, V. It was
It's fantastic.
super grateful to Pierre for all his time, and yeah, it was a lot of fun to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, it was great to kind of be at least prompted to think a little bit differently than what we've naturally do, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
I love the push to think differently. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot here, and I think marketers should spend more time thinking about their, how their brand comes to life through audio formats, and start playing with that a lot more, because I think it could probably work out better for them in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
All right,
okay, V. Until next time.
Yeah, man.
Adieu.
Adieu.